During World War II, the Mediterranean Sea became a critical battleground where the fate of North Africa and Southern Europe was contested fiercely. Control over this vast body of water meant securing vital supply routes, projecting naval and air power, and influencing the wider conflict. From the heroic defense of Malta to the dramatic desert campaigns led by legendary commanders, this theater shaped many strategic decisions and marked turning points that would affect the course of the war. When Hitler triumphantly advanced across Western Europe in the early summer of 1940, his ally Mussolini launched his own invasion. The Greeks were outnumbered more than 2-1, yet they quickly pushed the Italians back. This was the first indication that Italy's army was poorly prepared for combat. The rest of the plan involved creating a vast stretch of Italian-controlled land. The campaign seemed straightforward. Italy aimed to build a new Roman Empire that would expand not only along the northern Mediterranean coast, but also farther south into North Africa. Nearly 40,000 Italian soldiers were captured. Mussolini sought to transform the Mediterranean Sea, Mare Nostrum as it was called, into an Italian domain. In September 1940, he invaded Egypt and took the small coastal town of Sidi Barrani. The Italians halted there and entrenched themselves. Britain assembled every available unit for a counteroffensive across Libya. Although almost 10 times fewer in number compared to the Italians, the British forces managed to gain ground. The difficult, rugged terrain hindered communication and movement, but after nearly a year, the Western Desert Force had advanced roughly 600 miles. Meanwhile, to the south, British troops invaded Italian-controlled Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia. The fighting persisted for nearly 12 months. In December 1940, the British crossed the desert and, within 4 days, had overrun Italian positions. The defeated Italians retreated back into Libya, with British forces following closely. Mussolini's ambition to create an empire was bringing trouble in the Mediterranean. His plan involved capturing British-controlled Egypt and Sudan, believing it would help expand Italy's territories. In April 1939, 2 years earlier, as part of this imperial vision, Mussolini had occupied Albania and secured Libya and Abyssinia. However, his invasion of Greece the following year ended in failure, with the Greeks refusing to become an Italian colony. The Italian army suffered heavy losses, with more than 100,000 troops taken prisoner, and their empire contracting under pressure. By early March 1941, the Italians had not only been expelled from Greece, but also from much of neighboring Albania. As the British forces retreated, Rommel advanced aggressively. Within weeks, the Allied troops, already weakened by campaigns in Greece and Crete, were overwhelmed. Rommel commanded around 22,000 paratroopers and glider-borne soldiers, supported by 150 Stuka dive bombers. The Axis powers had secured control over large sections of the Mediterranean and critical supply routes. Consequently, the British units in North Africa were compelled to abandon their campaign in Libya so that the Greeks could complete their operations. However, Britain's forces were stretched thin, already overstretched, and heavily committed elsewhere. This situation presented Hitler with a dilemma. Should he divert troops from other parts of Europe to assist his crucial ally, Mussolini, or leave him stranded to his fate? He chose to intervene. In April 1941, more than 500,000 German soldiers poured into Yugoslavia and Greece. The landings commenced lightly on May 20th, initially targeting key airfields, with the arrival of the Afrika Korps shortly following. Rommel, a rising star in the German military selected personally by Hitler, arrived at Tripoli in February 1941, poised to drive British forces from the region entirely. He quickly moved toward British positions at El Agheila and launched attacks. The Axis captured Athens in late April, forcing the British and Allied troops into a difficult retreat. Within 2 weeks, the campaign ended with the evacuation of 15,000 Allied soldiers and the capture of 18,000 more. About 30,000 troops were withdrawn to the British-controlled island of Crete, which soon came under constant German air assault. The Germans seized vital airfields and began flying in reinforcements. Pushed back steadily, the Allies found themselves close to the Egyptian border, with Australian divisions covering the retreat. At the same time, Mussolini's ambitions in the Balkans collapsed, and his forces were in serious trouble. Approximately 16,000 German soldiers and over 100 tanks were pulled from the European front to help bolster the Axis effort in North Africa and the Mediterranean. The German forces had cut off Allied troops at the Libyan harbor of Tobruk. The British retreat risked turning into a rout. At last, General Auchinleck rallied to confront his opponent. Though the tanks suffered heavy losses, infantry units steadily advanced. Axis troops pulled back along the coastal route, all the way to their initial starting point at El Agheila. Operation Crusader began with an extensive armored battle. Once again, the British forces repeatedly outflanked their foes. After a month of chaotic combat, Rommel withdrew and Tobruk was relieved. The North African campaign was essentially reset. Rommel's main offensive formed near the Egyptian village of El Alamein. His southern flank rested on the Qattara Depression, a landscape impassable to tanks. Auchinleck faced intense pressure to try again to break the siege of Tobruk. The struggle lasted 3 weeks, with each side attempting to outmaneuver the other. Taking advantage of the wide-open terrain, Rommel used his tanks to maneuver around the British positions repeatedly, a tactic that would become his signature move. Initially, Auchinleck refused to commit until reinforcements arrived. Then, on November 18, 1941, he launched a major attack. However, after 2 failed attempts to relieve Tobruk, the exhausted British commander was replaced by General Claude Auchinleck. The Allied forces fell back toward a new defensive line just west of Tobruk, where a series of fortifications were constructed. Rommel struck this Gazala line at the end of May. His troops continued to press their advantage with swift outflanking movements, forcing the British into retreat. Rommel's famous 88mm anti-aircraft guns, capable of engaging tanks at long range, outmatched British armor. The German forces, now well entrenched, managed to thwart British counterattacks. Eventually, the British were forced to withdraw completely. 3 days later, Axis troops overran, scattered Allied positions along the coast, dispersing British units to various bases for much-needed rest and reorganization. The British press, albeit reluctantly, dubbed Rommel the Desert Fox for his cunning tactics. By January 1942, Rommel's Africa Corps was back on the offensive, again swinging his armor around the British forces. However, this time the British were better prepared and tried to hold their ground. On July 1, 1942, Rommel launched another offensive. However, this time the British defenses held firm. The situation around Malta remained uncertain. The island's naval forces were modern and well-equipped, prompting the Italians to focus their attacks on the Mediterranean Sea. British oil supplies from the Middle East continued to flow through these waters without significant interference in the early months of World War II. During this period, the Allies had maintained undisputed dominance over the region, a control they did not expect to lose. Churchill grew increasingly frustrated with the British Army's lack of progress, likening the situation to two exhausted boxers. On November 11th, the British executed a daring strike against the Italian fleet stationed at Taranto. That evening, 21 Swordfish torpedo bombers took off from a British aircraft carrier and launched an attack. The Italians were caught off guard. The island of Malta, under British control, was a strategically vital refueling station for Royal Navy submarines and aircraft operating in the eastern Mediterranean. During the summer of 1940, Italy began bombing Malta, marking the start of a prolonged two-year campaign that inflicted severe hardship on the island's inhabitants. The British and Axis forces engaged in a stalemate, neither side able to secure a decisive victory. British efforts to disrupt Axis supply convoys across the Mediterranean became increasingly crucial. Eventually, British fighter reinforcements arrived, temporarily repelling Italian bombers. For 3 weeks, the struggle for air superiority over Malta was intense. Almost by chance, a shipment of 4 Gladiator biplanes was discovered in crates on the island and quickly assembled. These made a significant difference in resisting the attacks. Recognizing the pressing need for change, the British replaced General Auchinleck with 2 new commanders, General Harold Alexander as Commander-in-Chief Near East, and General Bernard Montgomery to lead the 8th Army in North Africa. The fate of North Africa remained uncertain, heavily dependent on maintaining control of supply routes. That winter, Britain launched what it hoped would be a decisive blow, even as Rommel, stretched thin and low on fuel, was forced to halt his advance. 3 of Italy's 6 battleships were severely damaged during British strikes, setting the stage for a renewed Allied effort several months later. The Axis fleet was once again caught off guard near the Greek coastline. Despite the hardships, the civilians showed remarkable bravery. It was clear that decisive intervention was necessary. Almost immediately, the convoy encountered stiff German resistance. For 3 consecutive days, intense naval battles raged in the Mediterranean, threatening to sever critical supply lines to North Africa. Out of 17 ships, only 2 managed to get through. Conditions on Malta grew increasingly dire. Nevertheless, the British garrison held firm. During a lull in the German bombing campaign in the autumn of 1941, they even intensified their efforts against Axis supply convoys heading to North Africa. After enduring 4 months of relentless attacks, the island's defenders were honored with the George Cross, the highest decoration for civilian bravery in Britain. This struggle marked a turning point for Hitler as well. The Luftwaffe resumed its bombardment in early 1941, inflicting further severe damage on Malta. Yet, despite the continuous assault, the island's population persevered. By the summer of 1942, Malta faced critical shortages of supplies and ammunition. In mid-June, the British organized a large naval escort to reinforce the island. Although the Axis powers unleashed heavy attacks, Malta's people remained steadfast. In April 1942, following months of bombardment, the situation remained precarious. The following August saw Britain launch Operation Pedestal, the largest convoy ever dispatched to Malta. 14 merchant vessels sailed through the Strait of Gibraltar towards the beleaguered island, escorted by a substantial naval force. Axis submarines and aircraft fiercely tried to intercept and destroy the convoy. A 4th Italian battleship was damaged during the fighting, signaling the end of Mussolini's naval challenge to Britain. It also became evident that Italy could no longer rely on maintaining dominance in the Mediterranean.